and thank you very much for attending this webinar today, in which we plan to outline the changes to induction for newly qualified teachers, or early career teachers as we'll start to refer to them. So I'm Sally Stanton, I'm Director of Education at Advantage Schools, and I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by John Hutchinson and Stuart Locke, who were both part of the expert panel that worked on the new early career framework, which I think makes them perfect choices to talk us through the changes and the rationale behind them. We will then hear from the team in our schools who are affected by this change. At Advantage Schools, we took part in the early rollout of the ECF programme this year, so we'll be able to share our insights from choosing your pathway to what it's actually been like delivering the support. So to help me with that, we have Naomi Bell from Advantage Schools, who will talk about her experience delivering high quality training for both mentors and ECTs across our trust. Sarah Chanter from Elstow School and Belinda Goodship from Bedford Free School, and they'll reflect on leading the programme implementation in their schools. We have Natasha Marola, who's a mentor at Bedford Free School, and very importantly, we'll be joined by Alicia Webster, who's our wonderful early career teacher. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody who's joining us to talk tonight. As we talk, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. So once I've handed over to some other people, I'll be monitoring these and I'll be trying to answer them directly as we go. And then if there are any that I can't answer or that are for particular panelists, we can try and deal with that at the end. But before we make a start with John and Stuart's presentation, I just want to get a sense of our audience's current understanding of the ECF. So what I'm going to attempt to do is bring up a poll. There will be 3 questions for you to answer, so I'll just give you a few moments to read the questions and then answer them. Let's give it a few more moments to wait for the last few votes to come in. Okay. Great. This is looking good, actually. So I'm going to just close the poll in a moment. I can just see a couple of people just answering now, actually. So there we go. So you should be able to see the results if I share them with you. For the benefit of our panelists, it looks as if we've got an audience who either are very aware or somewhat aware. So nobody is surprised that we're having this conversation, which is good news. And we've got a range of preparation here, from not yet prepared to just beginning to discuss or have more to do. So and a small number of people are ready and also took part in the early rollout. And then what we have got is 50% of people using a funded programme from an accredited provider, but not decided yet. So it's still something to think about there. And others are still thinking and making their decisions. So hopefully that will help the panellists bear in mind how much information you might need. And hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions and move forward with that. So without further ado, I shall hand over to John and to Stuart to get us started.
Thanks so much, Sally. Good afternoon, late afternoon, I guess. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Stuart Locke. I'm the CEO of Advantage Schools.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Hutchinson. I was, until very recently, an assistant head teacher at Reach Academy Feltham, and a primary school teacher, and I guess was part of the early career framework, just a normal classroom teacher.
Yeah, and we were fortunate to be on the group that wrote and came up with the idea, I guess, and wrote the early career framework, having been on the recruitment and retention group at the DFE, advisory group at the DFE originally. And the early career framework was a very clear part of that. And we thought we'd go through a couple of things. We in the next 15 minutes or so, we talk about why we think the early career framework is a really great idea, but also John is going to take us through kind of what schools have to do and what we have to be ready for in September, prior to the team at Advantage Schools taking us through what we've done over the last year. I think it's fair to say that I might be biased, but I think that the focus on professional learning more broadly, and specifically the early career framework, is possibly the most exciting thing to have come out of education in around the last decade. The entitlement that is there for early career teachers, I think, is phenomenal, and the incredibly smart people that we were able to work with in writing the early career framework, the knowledge that's come into that document, and hopefully will set a precedent for the profession for a long time to come, I think is something that I'm super excited by. I want to ask a provocative question, rhetorical, but there are very low barriers to entry for teaching compared to other professions. And I think that causes us to be a less desirable profession. I said this in the recruitment and retention group, and a few others said it as well. And so a question for us is, should there be a test or an assessment that teachers have to pass to be teachers? And I think lots of people react really strongly to that, but I think maybe there should. Currently, as I said, there are very low barriers to entry in our profession. John?
This really, I think, got the table talking at the early, because this question, we kicked off with this at one of the early meetings. Should we have like a big exam at the end of teacher training where you have to, and what would that exam include, right? That's an interesting question itself. Would there be sections on your subject, on pedagogy, on curriculum? What would be in that exam? What do we expect teachers to know? And I think that really one of the things that is a consequence of having that sort of discussion is, well, is there any shared knowledge? Is there something where you could walk into any school in the country and say, have a conversation with the teacher and know they will have read a particular book or they'll know a particular theory? And when we were having this conversation, we thought maybe like Piaget. I guess that Piaget was probably only recently published when you were training, Stuart. But since then, it was cutting edge during Stuart's teacher training. But hopefully we've moved on slightly, right? And there is like a really good sort of body of knowledge now. The problem is that that's not sort of codified. And I remember I went to Chris Bolton's house. Chris Bolton, some of you might know, he's a sort of educationalist, works at a company called Uplearn now, and he was living with lawyers at the time. And I walked past this bookshelf, and there was this huge array of tort law, big sort of volumes, and I was quite intimidated by it. And I said, "What's this?" And his flatmate, who was a barrister, said, "Oh, well, that's what you need to know to be a barrister. You have to read it, you have to remember it, you have to understand it. You have a test at the end to check that you've done all of those things. And what that means is any barrister, when you go and speak to any barrister, you can be absolutely sure that they know all of that stuff." And I thought, I wish that existed for teaching. That to me sounds like something I'd really wear that as a badge of pride, knowing that there's this huge collected sort of body of knowledge. And I'm not saying that that's going to be set concrete and set in stone, but there's this huge body of sort of collective knowledge that we all share as a profession.
So, and I guess that that word profession was the thing that kept coming up, wasn't it, John? I remember that we were talking about how how we didn't feel like as much of a profession as perhaps others, because like if you go on a teacher training course, you pretty much very close to 100% of people pass, right? And they pass, and so it feels like almost anybody can be a teacher. And yet it's such a complex job and such a difficult job to get right. People talk about mastering it through 30 or 40 year careers, and yet we have a kind of zero expectation. The bookshelf for teachers that you described is literally nothing. And we talked, I remember in this group, about the things that we've been exposed to in recent years that I certainly wasn't exposed to in the early part of my career. Things about how to run a school and a classroom in a really orderly manner, and the things that we know enable us to do that well. Insights from cognitive science. I mean, we hear a lot, particularly if you're on social media now, about things like retrieval practice and dual coding and so on. But I didn't hear any of that when I was training to be a teacher. And some of those are really important things to make sure that our pupils learn as much as we can. Things to do with assessment and the concepts of validity and reliability are things that I didn't really get exposed to for 15 years of my career. And it seems to me that that's absolutely central to being a really good teacher from minute one, and loads of other things as well. And we talked about those things that we've been exposed to recently that we feel like would be an entitlement to people in the profession from the start. As I say, I didn't come across this in my training or even just after. And we weren't, like, I remember I wasn't expected to know very much when I walked into the classroom. It was all about my presence.
And I think, I guess there's two interesting things here, because teaching is sort of like, on the one hand, it does feel like that intuitive sort of like natural, everybody sort of is a teacher. Everybody will have taught somebody something at some point. And so some of those basic sort of like communication and sort of like modeling skills, it seems like it's quite intuitive. But we surely want to go beyond that, right? We don't want to say, look, we've got a focus as professional teachers, we've got a folk understanding of teaching and learning. And I do think that, I think you're right, Stuart. I think that one of the things that I was still quite new to the profession. I'd only been teaching about 5 years at the time I was on the panel. So I was actually delighted that the DFE chose somebody who was still so green, really, to sort of be on that panel. And I remember thinking, this profession has a fingers crossed approach to early career development. It's like some people might stumble upon some of this stuff, and if they do, then great. But there's absolutely no guarantee that they will. They might go through their whole career never having been exposed to some really robust findings, and in other cases actually be given the opposite understanding of some of what we know. And an example of that is something like the testing effect. So I remember during my initial teacher training in early career being told multiple times, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. You shouldn't be giving your kids tests because they are demotivating, demoralizing, it's grindy, and it's dull. And apart from anything, giving them lots and lots of tests over and over again doesn't make them any smarter. Use the time for teaching instead. Well, in fact, one of the most robust findings from psychology generally as a field, and cognitive science and memory science more specifically, is that the testing effect does exist, that the more regularly somebody retrieves something, the more likely they are to be able to bring that to mind at a moment's notice. So I think that one of the things that was interesting is, well, what are those things? You mentioned validity and reliability, which I think Dylan Williams said you shouldn't be in a classroom if you don't know those concepts. Most teachers don't. I certainly didn't. In many ways, I think I'm still grappling with them. But what is that list? What's that curriculum? If kids are having a curriculum that we think that they're entitled to, what's the entitlement for teachers? And I think the one thing that we found is, quite quickly, that list actually, what was really great and really encouraging is that list got really long really quickly, right? Of, hey, we know a lot about teaching and learning and assessment and culture and special educational needs, and there is a body of knowledge that exists. It's just not written down anywhere, and so we're leaving it to chance about whether or not teachers new to the profession get that. So there was a group of really, really smart people in the room from all sorts of aspects of education and beyond, those working in schools, those working for people like the EEF and people like the Chartered College of Teaching, academic bodies. We had Becky Francis from the UCL Institute of Education, and really sort of downloaded and tried to codify what that list would be. what that sort of offer would be, and a consultation went out to the profession. And I think, how did you feel about that, Stuart? Did you have a gut reaction of how the profession would respond to, we think it's a good idea to codify, itemize everything that teachers should know, and then ensure that early career teachers get taught that in their first few years in the classroom? Did you have a sort of feeling of, this is going to be a disaster, they're going to hate it? Or
yeah, I didn't. I remember when we did the consultation, do you remember we were in the room and we said, don't consult with the profession unless we're going to listen? And genuinely, we were ready to be wrong about this. But then it came back, 88.3% said the early career framework with an entitlement is really important. I think it was a big relief. It was a big relief that the profession recognises that we can be significantly better. And when you even when I read the early career framework now, I would go through it and I'm like, if we do this with fidelity, our schools are going to be so much better, like full stop. So I guess I was nervous to an extent, and I was relieved when it came back so positive. Of course, at that point, the group had to then write the thing, right, and find out. And I remember we invited the EEF in to kind of robustly challenge our proposals for what would be in it and so on. And I think, although we're going on a bit further and we want to get to the stuff that people have to do, John, I remember that we wrote into the framework of the early career framework that we don't know everything for sure. That's the nature of teaching, but that as more research is done, or we get a better understanding of the research out there, our best bets as a profession might change over time. And we wrote that into the fabric of the early career framework to allow it to evolve, and for it to be implicit that in a few years' time we'll have an even better, probably like quite similar, we're quite confident about some of the bets we've made, but an even better early career framework and entitlement that leads into other reforms that we've had now of the MPQs and so on. And the other thing I think we should say is that really early on, we said to ministers in that group, like, do you want us to basically tweak things to make recruitment and retention a bit better? Do you want us to kind of like make things look quite nice for you and so on? Or can we do something properly, but that's going to require like 100,000, like 100, I can't remember, a load of money and like a real political will, and you're going to have to really kind of push this and make it a top priority. And it came back with, no, this is the one time we're going to actually do something really substantial. And they saw it through to be like through 3 secretaries of state, we saw it through to the end, which I think is something really impressive. I don't know if there's anything you want to say more about how, like, basically what we're trying to get the point across here is that the ECF, it will be a game changer if schools do it properly, I think is the point. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about it more generally before we go on to the kind of specifics, John.
No, I don't think so. I think just to reiterate that of like, this is, I think that this certainly shouldn't be seen as something that is being done to schools, that it's another sort of like stick to beat schools with, or that it's something that schools, I think it should be seen as like, this is us as schools, as leaders, as teachers, sort of like claiming our profession. And that's really exciting. So let's just go through and to zoom out a little bit, the early career teacher sort of fits into to what we hope is a lifelong teacher, somebody who spends their whole career in education. And we talked a little bit about what the pathway of a teacher might be, and how for many teachers what they might want to do is go on to become a middle leader and then a senior leader and eventually maybe even a head teacher or a trust leader. But for lots of teachers, that actually isn't what gets them out of bed in the morning. They love being in the classroom, and they might take a particular specialism. So they might, for example, want to work with children with special educational needs, or they might want to, for example, become a real like assessment expert. And that as well was one of the key parts of the early career framework, that we can start to sort of put those foundation blocks in place so that people can take their career in a direction that suits them. So key changes, obviously, we're going from 1 year to 2 years. We're not going to be calling them NQTs, newly qualified teachers, anymore. They'll be called early career teachers. And there's an extra entitlement. So in the second year, there's still non-contact time for early career teachers. We made it 2 years because we felt that there was so much stuff in there that you couldn't do it properly in 1 year. In fact, we didn't really think you could do it properly in two years, but it had to be. But we had to stop somewhere. So that's why there's the 2 years. And look, we didn't think that we would get the extra non-contact time because it costs a ton of money, and we were really shocked. We said, look, we can tell you now, if you go to the profession and say you need to do a second year and you still need to learn all this stuff, but you're teaching full time, then everyone's going to tell you to get stuff. When are they supposed to do it? And so that second year of protected non-contact time funded, including the mentors funding, is built into that as well. So it'll be 2 years. They'll have a mentor for those 2 years, and that mentor will just be about helping that teacher, that early career teacher, to develop their teaching practice, to understand the knowledge statements within the early career framework, and to help translate that into their practice, to help translate that into their particular classroom. So this slide's quite helpful in terms of like where we've come from to where we're going. So we're doubling the length of support. There's going to be 2 years. There's still going to be that reduction in timetable in the second year. And I think most excitingly, there is now a clearly defined content. There's now clearly defined content in terms of exactly what should early career teachers know and be able to do. We're splitting that role of the induction, the professional tutor, the induction coordinator, and the mentor. So the mentor can just focus on developing the teacher, and those assessment points will then take place by somebody else elsewhere. One thing that isn't changing is that teachers will still be signed off against the teaching standards. So currently, we go, if I've got an NQT that I'm an NQT tutor for, I'll observe them once a term, and on the back of that, assess them against the teacher standards and say, yes, they're on track. This is not an assessment tool. Maybe we say this. I'm going to say this. Everybody passes. Everybody just passes. It's a bit of a nonsense that you've just got QTS, and to get QTS, what you have to do is say that you've met the teaching standards, and then the next step in your journey is to meet the teaching standards again, which means that everybody just passes there. So that's sort of, I think, like a little bit of a distraction. The one danger of this is that the early career framework becomes like a tick sheet, and people start putting like check boxes on it and like ticking. That's not what it's for. There's no requirement for any evidence. It's in the early career framework document in bold letters. It says this is not an assessment tool. It shouldn't be seen as success criteria, and you shouldn't be collecting evidence against this framework. So if somebody tells you to do that, please tell them to read the early career framework and not do it, because it will kill it.
I think it's worth saying we wanted to go past the teacher standards, didn't we? But that wasn't on the table. Like, we were told no, basically. Like, you've got all these radical things you're allowed to do, but don't touch those for now.
So it was in a glass cabinet on the wall. So the pay progression is still the same. So it's not like, and in fact, the recent indications that pay is going to increase for new entrants into the career, and there's still all of the normal statutory entitlements and pension contributions and all of that. The appropriate bodies will check off. They will check off the head teacher's assessment as usual, so that's not changing either. There are three options of what you do. So it might be that there are some schools and they say, hey, we are really proud of our early career offer. We think we do a great job. I'll be honest, I don't think anybody is offering like what the early career framework sort of sets out, because it's bold, it is really ambitious. There's stuff in there that I would still feel like, gosh, I need to think about this and read about this and have a go at this after teaching for almost a decade. And so, however, if somebody says, look, you can't do this to me, we've already got our offer, that's fine. You can just continue to do your own thing as long as it's underpinned by the early career framework. What we also wanted was commissioned videos, resources, reading materials, examples from really sort of credible organizations, and we wanted them to be free for everybody. And so the DFE went away and they commissioned that, and they got a number of different bodies to create those curriculum materials. And it might just be that you just download those and you use those. So if you're a mentor, then you've got like a number of different, it's really easy to play around with the websites, a number of different sort of like modules from different providers. But there's another option, which is probably what most people will go for, because why wouldn't you, which is a fully funded, supported program by an approved provider, which includes all of those materials, and then also has a bunch of like extra stuff on top of that. And I know that Stuart and I know that the rest of the team are going to talk about your experience working with a professional provider.
And that's through the teaching school hubs that you can do in our region, but outside of our region as well, and so on. So there's a variety of options available.
So one of the first questions that everybody asks, which is a good question to ask, is how will this be funded, and like, will this be funded, and so once, like, one of the, again, we wanted to like really remove barriers that made this annoying for schools, and so the funding will go directly from the DFE to the selected provider. So all schools have to do is select the provider that they will be going with, whether that's Ambition or Teach First, whoever they choose. They sign up with that provider, and then the DFE just funds those straight away. There's also then additional funding for each school for the mentor's time, which means that the mentor can make sure that they have the time available to really sort of like work with that teacher, because we're going to be asking them to go into classrooms a little bit more, because they're going to want to see some of this stuff in action. If you've been talking about how you might use formative assessment more successfully and responsive teaching by, for example, increasing the validity of your particular inferences by taking a larger sample or all whiteboards up, you're going to want to see that in your classroom. So the mentor will be going in more. They'll have all of that material available. So I know that when I've been an NQT tutor before, I've sort of walked into those meetings to my shame, often thinking, gosh, what we're going to talk about today. Whereas there'll be a really clear framework that has all of the materials available that you can read together, watch videos together, discuss together, and put into action together. So over the 2 years, you can see the early career teacher completes their induction over those 2 years. They have those 2 sort of assessment points at against the teaching standards. That mentor role is going to be, I think that's going to be a role that lots of people aspire to. I think lots of people in schools, I know that like lots of my colleagues would really love that role of sitting down and sort of like geeking out about some educational research together for a little while, thinking about how exactly you're going to do it in a lesson. I think that would be great. The induction coordinator will then complete the assessments, and the head teacher, as usual, signs off and completes all of the relevant paperwork to ensure that they get the funding for those, both the mentor and the early career teacher. Appropriate bodies sign up as usual.
And I should say these slides we'll put on our website, and we'll send them out to anybody who's registered for the webinar. So there's no need to take notes. And if you're watching it on record on our website, it should be next to it in a little download. John, thank you so much. Go on.
I'm just aware that we've doubled time, and I should say one of the things in the early career framework is around sort of economy of language and the importance of being concise when communicating ideas. And so you can just tell that I didn't have it. That's because I didn't.
Right, John, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sorry that we went over a little bit, but thank you. Sally.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. Like, that was very helpful overview, but also the insights into how it all started and how it's evolved is great. It's fascinating. So thank you so much for that. I just wanted to kind of bridge here between that side of things and then the school experience that we had this last year. So I think it was about this time last year, the DFE asked the national providers of the ECF programs to enable any school to sign up for early rollout, because they'd previously planned just to run it with a limited number of pilot schools. And the reason they opened it up more widely was obviously because our NQTs in our schools at that point had a really disrupted training year because of COVID. So it was felt this was a great chance to give them some enhanced support and develop their classroom practice. So at the time we decided what to do, we did have a really great induction program that I know that the leads in our schools, who you're going to hear from soon, had worked really hard on. And given that our CEO was involved in writing the ECF, clearly we were well aligned with the ECF, but we reflected really carefully and we discussed the opportunity to be involved in the early rollout, and we just thought there were real benefits to it. So firstly, we thought It would give us capacity. It would mean that we could support our early career teachers very effectively, we hoped. You know, thinking about how these national partners have teams of really experienced expert people, and it is their job to design, to test and refine that learning curriculum and the resources. And it just felt as if using that capacity, they also have capacity to provide administrative support. They've got access to technology platforms that really simplify and streamline the process. So given the year that we were all having, it just seemed very sensible to do what we could to draw on that capacity. And I think particularly if you're in a small school or a small trust, trying to do it yourself is a really big ask. And it isn't a comment at all on the quality of the people you have. It's literally about time if you're asking people to do all of that design alongside their current job role. For me as well, it was a really good opportunity, not just to develop our early career teachers, but also our more experienced staff. So I felt our school and our trust leads could benefit from some really high quality training. It means that they get to develop their coaching skills of a great set of teachers to really help those teachers have the tools to mentor really well, and also giving them a chance to reflect on their own classroom practice. So the first thing I did was compare and contrast what all the different providers were offering. They all had to meet the needs of the ECF, but I found some were much more explicit as to how they were structuring their curriculum and what style of training and mentoring they would offer. And for me, that was really helpful because it meant I could shortlist providers that I felt were well aligned with our approach in our trust. So I attended all the promotional sessions, read their websites. I had Teams meetings or called and spoke to them. And I basically ended up with a summary sheet identifying the pros and cons of each. And at that point, I consulted with Belinda and Sarah, who are the leads in our schools, because I knew they would be the ones who actually had to implement it. And it was our collective decision at that point, we decided we would work with our Ambition Institute. And we went with Ambition for a number of key reasons, really. We had positive experiences of their professional development already. So both Naomi and Belinda, for example, have completed master's or fellowship programs with Ambition. But also we really liked the structure, the curriculum that they'd put together, and the support that they had particularly identified around developing instructional coaching for the mentors, and developing that looked really good to us. So we were well aligned, and my advice would be look into all your different options and think about what the best fit will be for you and what your schools need. And having said that, you'll hear that tonight our experience with Ambition was positive. We are planning to work with them next year, but I do think it's important to look at all your options. And for us, we also decided we wanted to be involved in the training. So that was our choice. We could have let them assign us to people outside our organisation, but equally we had the choice to be trained by them to deliver the materials they'd put together themselves. And I'm actually going to talk to Naomi now because she can outline what that's like in a lot more detail. So Naomi, you're one of a number of us that train to deliver the professional development sessions, or clinics as they call them, to the early career teachers, but also the support for mentors. So can you just talk to us a bit about your experience of that, please?
So as well as the weekly mentoring sessions that all early career teachers will get, their mentoring kind of happens in 3 strands, behaviour being the first strand, then instruction, and then subject. And as well as the weekly mentoring, they will have self-study material, which from our provider is a reading and a short video to watch, and it prepares them to think about the specific actions and the specific things that their mentor will be discussing with them in their mentor meetings. Before the mentor meeting, they'll watch that video and read the summary, and the mentor will also choose a specific focus for that observation. So for example, if they were working on the instruction strand, a specific focus could be adapting teaching, and the mentor will have 3 options for the observation focus: planning to adapt teaching, so thinking more about what happens before they enter the classroom, understanding what pupils know, so what the teacher might be doing in front of the pupils, and then kind of adapting the teaching, so responding to what they're getting, the data that they're getting from the pupils, if that was the most appropriate step. So once the mentor has decided on the action step or the area of focus, our provider also offers support with identifying high leverage action steps for that specific area of development. And that is all on a platform which is recorded so that the mentor and the teacher and the lead in the school can all see what the teachers are working on and how they're getting on. There's also half-termly clinics which sort of follow on with a curriculum in the same sort of pattern as the mentoring sessions and the self-study sessions. And they include some of the harder to teach aspects of the framework. So more statutory guidance, more research-based ideas that the teachers then get to discuss with an expert. Things that are covered in those clinics: supporting all pupils, thinking about pupils with additional needs, student well-being, early literacy. So those are things that potentially not all early career teachers will have direct experience of, but it's important that they know. So those clinics help to kind of catch people, early career teachers up with things that they might not get direct experience with in their training. Thinking about what we received from our partnership delivery partners, we received really, really high quality materials, and a lot of the time consuming work was done for us. So when you're thinking about delivering a session, you think about the time it might take to actually decide on what you're going to present, the flow of it, how you're going to organize it, how you're going to get participants involved and what exactly you want them to be thinking about, what research evidence you want to include and what references you'll use, what statutory guidance might be relevant to include as well, and getting hold of that. All of that has been provided for us. As well as that, we get to watch a video with the person who designed the session, and then also be part of a question and answer session live with the person who designed it if we have any further questions after we've prepared. It might seem daunting, and I know lots of teachers have very strong opinions about delivering other people's lessons or sessions, but having all that support and access to the person who designed the session really helps to kind of make that really smooth and easy to do. So when I come to prepare a session or a lead comes to prepare a session, all we have to kind of think about is how we can add things from our own experience to make it more relevant or to be able to discuss it in more detail, tailoring it to our context. If we're delivering to people in our own trust or our own school, we might have extra insight that we want to focus on certain aspects rather than others. So everything's there in front of you, and you spend your time thinking about making it really good quality, really relevant, and really personalized to the people in the session. Another benefit that we found with using a delivery partner is that we're also really well supported with quality assurance, and that the coaching doesn't only happen with the early career teachers, but mentors get coaching twice a year. They also get a chance to meet with other mentors and have sessions kind of similar to how the early career teachers get clinics. There's 2 of those a year. As people who deliver the clinics, we also get coaching. So someone who's employed by our delivery partner Ambition will watch us, watch our sessions, and actually give us 2 coached sessions to improve our delivery. And the model that they use is instructional coaching. So it's high impact, high leverage, and really, really beneficial. So it's having a wider impact on our schools than just helping the early career teachers. Mentors are getting really good quality coaching and resources to help them develop their own understanding of teaching, and leads are getting really high quality support, and those who are delivering sessions also get to improve and to have some time to think about how they can develop their own skills as well.
Naomi, thank you so much. And we're going to call up Sarah Chanter. Sarah's the deputy head at our primary school, Elstow School. And Sarah, I've got a question for you. You were the lead in the primary school. Like, can you share your experiences and what it involved, please?
Yeah, so a key part of my role this year was to ensure that our SLT and our mentors and ECTs had the key information about what the ECF was and actually how this was going to look in our own school context. Because I'd received the training before the actual rollout, I was able to share the key headlines without having to overload anybody with extra paperwork. We used Ambition, and they use a platform, Step Lab. Early on, I needed to make sure I spent time working alongside those mentors so that I could support them with navigating the site. And we had lots of conversations about how to access the content and find the resources. There were many early SLT discussions regarding timings and the cover potential that needed to be considered to make sure that the mentors and the ECTs had their protected time. Ambition have a specific format that we needed to consider. We needed to ensure that the mentors and ECTs had time to complete their own weekly self-study, which was linked to the ternary strands. We needed to also make sure that the mentors could be released for a 10 to 15 minute weekly observation of their ECT before their planned coaching session could take place. We had to make sure then that the mentor had time to plan for their coaching session. And finally, we then made sure that there was a timetable day and time for the actual coaching session between the mentor and the ECT to take place. There were teething problems and we had to make lots of adjustments that needed to be made. However, we feel now we actually do have quite an established routine. I think it's important to remember that all ECTs are different. So you may need to adapt the pace and make tweaks where needed. As part of our package with the Ambition, I, as the lead, were able to have access to progress reports, which enabled me to see when the coaching has taken place, any courses that the mentors and ECTs have attended, which have been provided by Ambition, and also an opportunity to read the feedback and see what action steps had been set during the weekly coaching sessions. And being able to see this has allowed me to monitor the delivery of the content, putting me in actually a strong position to liaise with the mentors regarding any missed coaching, gaps in self-study, and ensuring that the ECTs are reviewing their action steps that have been set. I can then follow this up in my weekly mentor meetings. I'm very lucky, if I've had any questions or any queries, Ambition have only been an email away. And because all the leads attended the training together this time last year, I was actually able to lean on the support of the trust as well.
Thanks, Sarah. And Belinda, Belinda Goodship is our professional tutor at Bedford Free School and head of music. You were the lead in the secondary school. How were your experiences, and particularly anything different to Sarah?
Thanks, Stuart. So yeah, as a lead in a secondary school, I wanted to share with you today some of the things that have worked slightly differently for us. Primarily, we actually have a few more ECTs in our setting, and therefore we may oversee and manage our ECTs slightly differently. So I wanted to share some strategies that may have worked well for us when supporting a larger number of ECTs. So similarly to Sarah, I will monitor the engagement from ECTs and mentors using an online platform on a weekly basis. Our core induction provider will also regularly send us engagement and attendance reports, which are incredibly useful. All of this data that I have access to, I can use to have informed and purposeful conversations with mentors and ECTs where needed. Sarah also mentioned the importance of ensuring that ECTs and mentors have the protective time to meet on a weekly basis to carry out their instructional coaching. I suppose in a primary setting, this could look slightly different than in a secondary setting, as I imagine a TA could cover the lesson when the ECT is required to have their instructional coaching session with their mentor. So if you are preparing to have an ECT in a secondary school, please take timetabling into consideration to allow for one lesson a week to be blocked out on the ECTs and the mentors' timetables every week, so that they're not used for cover. You should also consider that the mentor needs to have the capacity to observe their ECT once a week for 15 to 20 minutes to inform the instructional coaching conversations. The one thing I'll briefly mention here is that our ECTs this year were also completing their NQT year with our local authority as well, and this of course came with other paperwork and assessments that they needed to complete to be accredited as an NQT as well with our local awarding body. So they had a lot to take on this year. So actually as an ECF lead this year, I provided them with an instructional coaching session script that I shared with them so they could fulfil all the requirements of the ECT and the NQT year in their weekly meetings. So I should mention here that your ECF provider, will provide you with loads of resources to model what an effective instructional coaching session should look like in the forms of videos and practice sessions, as we have plenty, and they were absolutely great. So over time, by having these really high quality resources from the ECF provider, these routines and excellent practice of instructional coaching eventually became habit and excellent. So it's important to note that as of course 2021, local awarding bodies will be providing a 2-year programme, as mentioned earlier, of training and support, with the final assessment taking place at the end of those 2 years. And I know that our local awarding body are working hard at the moment to ensure that their support at a local level will align as best as it can with the ECF providers. I suppose the other thing I want to mention is that with a larger amount of ECTs and mentors to manage, firstly, the online platform support that Sarah mentioned works really, really well, as it's less likely that you as a lead, when you've got are able to visit and manage and catch up with every mentor, every ECT individually on a regular basis every single week. So secondly, a strategy to add to this, I found that mentor briefing emails worked quite well. I'd send this out once a week to mentors, bullet pointing their actions for the week and any upcoming actions and deadlines. The content of these emails would be informed by the correspondence I would receive from Ambition, our ECF provider, but also at the beginning of the academic year, I created an ITT and new teacher calendar of events. So on this one calendar that I would share with all mentors, I had all the important dates across the year for all of the ITT providers we deal with in our setting, plus the ECF as well. So finally, the last point I want to make here is I wanted to just talk about the allocation of mentors. We did think very carefully about who we were going to ask to be mentors of our ECTs. And in a secondary setting, we felt it was really important that the mentor we chose was from the same subject area. We were lucky that we had the capacity to do this. And in any setting, it's most important that you just take the time to consider who you think would be that best person for the job. Also, as Sarah mentioned, there's a fair amount of training and preparation to undertake to develop into a successful mentor for the ECF programme. You therefore should choose people that are going to be diligent and with this and have the capacity to complete the training and mentoring modules to develop themselves. And by ensuring your mentors have the required knowledge and instructional coaching skills, it will mean that the instructional coaching conversations between mentor and ECT will be meaningful and purposeful, and will allow for your ECT to make the best progress.
Thank you so much, Belinda. And we've got Natasha Marola. Natasha is second in English at Bedford Free School. And Natasha, you've been mentoring Alicia, who we're going to hear from in a bit this year. Can you tell us what that's involved?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, as outlined, we meet weekly and we use Ambition and Step Lab. Obviously, as Naomi's already said, that there's a target or an action step per week, and sometimes we have had moments where the step that the provider gives doesn't quite match up with what Alicia is struggling with in that week, or not necessarily struggling with, but wants to work on in that week. But actually, Step Lab is great for us because it has the choice of different targets. We can go back to a previous step if we need to, and they're kind of differentiated or scaffolded as well. So we're able to find a target that works, and we can, like I said, we can go over ones that are previously covered. The instructional coaching has actually really helped me as a mentor. I have one-on-one meetings with Sally, and we've been part of the coaching on coaching sessions that have been really helpful, so that when I am delivering the feedback to Alicia from her observation, that I feel confident that I'm able to give my model of best practice, and then in turn observe her model of best practice, and so on. Obviously the observations have been mentioned, that it's 10 to 15 minutes per week. For some schools, I understand this idea of the weekly observations can be actually quite nerve-wracking, but it's so different to my role as an NQT mentor a few years ago, where they're not the like half-termly, hour-long intensive notes, and that they're like the NQT is stressing over their observation. It's normalizing the idea of observing, giving feedback, and then working on that, and making sure that it's as developed as possible in classroom practice. And it's actually been really nice in our like seeing my ECT every single week, and I can see the development, I can see the confidence growing. And she was an amazing trainee, and she's just not transformed, but become this even more developed and well-rounded classroom teacher. Another thing as well is that I think the discussions just work really well. My own CPD has been like enlightened by this process. I mean, the videos that we watch each week, we have time sometimes in our mentor meetings to watch them together, and it's just nice to have that discussion, as John said, of having these geek outs about pedagogy and what we're learning about. And I mean, like I said, there's so much to learn, and there are so many things there that sometimes we've forgotten, and it's helped my classroom practice as a mentor. And it's been really great to have the support from trickle down from Ambition through Sally to myself. I guess the separate thing that's a bit different with myself and Alicia is that Alicia is also a Teach First trainee. So we did have some reservations at first, as we worried about the expectations from Teach First and then Ambition and Step Lab, as well as the Borough, but actually it hasn't been too strenuous, especially with paperwork stuff, because actually what we've been able to do for the Borough termly reviews is use the evidence that we've taken from Step Lab and use that to put into our termly reviews. So Ambition's really worked for us as a school, and it aligns with our values, as well as Alicia's Teach First course. So it's been really, really great use for us. Hopefully that's helpful.
Can I just butt in a bit with a question, because we've had a question in the Q&A box. Natasha, how much time do you need to spend a week preparing for the observations and the coaching session, please?
So for the coaching session, I would like that 10-15 minutes of a video and then a reading section. But as I said, sometimes at the end, it depends how long you've been that you have free for your coaching session. But sometimes me and Alicia have that 10-15 minutes to do that reading and watch the video together. Other times, if we haven't, it's like I said, that 10 minutes. Sometimes it's just nice to actually have that break away, watch the video, do your reading by yourself, just like you normally would with any kind of CPD. And it's just nice to enjoy that time. And then the observation is like 10 minutes. I ask Alicia, when am I most likely to see this action step? She'll say, right, the first 10 minutes, last 10 minutes, I pop in, make some notes, take my laptop, make the observation notes, and then I'll be out again doing my marking. So I mean, I'd had reservations about the amount of time that I would be spending, but actually it's been nothing like what I expected. It's been really great. It's not really hindered my time at all.
So one of the things is choose your support partner carefully, I think has really come through. Natasha, thank you so much for your contributions. Alicia is our early career teacher. She's probably the most important person here because she is an early career teacher who's had this support due to the early rollout. Alicia, can you tell us how you feel the whole package has been beneficial for you? And while we're running slightly over, it's really important that you're not you don't feel rushed, because it's really important that people hear how this has been for you as an early career teacher.
Yeah, of course. I can't seem to turn my camera on. I've been disabled by the host, but I am a disembodied voice, so that's fine. Ah, there we go. We knew there'd be a tech teething problem. So just to kind of pick up, I suppose, on what everyone else has been saying, but from the actual new teacher perspective, certainly the provider that we've gone with and the access to research that has enabled, as Natasha was just saying, the kind of the video and the 10-15 minute reading. The reading is essentially a summary, a condensing of a mass of reading from various sources, which saves a lot of time, that you're not having to find the best things, you're not having to search out and decide whether it's good quality or not. That work has already been done for you. You then just have the time to digest that, and I think that's been really useful. And it's all fully referenced, which has then been helpful for kind of further research, and if I want to read deeper into anything. That research and reading then means that we can have really informed conversations, Natasha and I, during our meetings. And the scaffolding that it provides those meetings is really useful. It can be tempting, I think, partly because of the way our timetable is set up. We're always teaching at the same time, that we take those opportunities to have a kind of social catch-up, or just to talk about the kind of minutiae specific problems I'm having with individual classes or students, when really that's probably not the most effective conversation to have to further my practice and develop myself as a teacher. And so having a target or a step, as Ambition calls it, to work on each week means that it really focuses us in on something that is going to develop me in a much more holistic way. It also means that I'm getting feedback both kind of on the trial run of whatever my change in practice is going to be, that coaching that takes place and kind of the practice that I get to do, and feedback to make kind of the perfect, sometimes script even, to then do in my lesson and have further feedback on, just provides a lot more opportunities for swift, but also quite informal, so it's not super pressured feedback and observations. The resourcing is, as has been for the training for people kind of further up the line, is similarly high quality for myself, and certainly the fact that this is kind of relatively low in what it requires of my time, as Natasha was saying, was a concern, but is something that actually I've found, because it's pre-distilled and you're not having to search it out, it is succinct and quite easy to kind of build into my time each week, on top of kind of other commitments. And so that's something that I was initially concerned about, but was completely unfounded once we actually began the programme. And I think the clinics were something that I didn't maybe anticipate would be super useful, because I think in my head I'd misunderstood what they would be for, and that they would just be going over stuff that Natasha and I had already gone over, or stuff I'd already read. But I think what Naomi was saying and Sally was saying about how you can kind of, what they're bringing to it is maybe the contextualized experience or their own past experiences and things that we're not normally covering as part of our teacher training. An example would be, we had a session that was focusing on our relationship and engagement with parents and carers of our students, and that was really useful because we had a parents' evening coming up, and it was something that I felt I hadn't previously had specific training on. I'd kind of done them, I'd maybe sat next to another teacher doing one, but actually hearing kind of objective research about what is an effective way to kind of conduct those meetings, or, you know, to get parents and carers on board and communicate with them, was really effective. And being based in research, again, meant that it was kind of much more usable than just an anecdote from a teacher who you maybe sat next to during one parents' evening before you're then thrown into having to run a number yourself. And I'd say that is the overwhelming thing with the programme, is that everything is based on research that you're not having to search out or identify yourself. You feel you can trust it, and it really clearly, step by step, supports you in your development and in those conversations with your mentor, to kind of pursue that development together as a team.
Alicia, thank you so much. I don't know what was going on with your video. I'm really sorry that you were flashing on and off all the time, but thank you so much for your insights. We're just going to, the final bit, we're just going to ask for some final words of advice, particularly from Sarah Chanter and Belinda Goodship. What key piece of advice would you offer someone else in your role to make the ECF work in their schools? Sarah first.
Yes, so I can't get my video on either, but I think I'd first like to say that the prospect of implementing the ECF in your school is going to feel quite overwhelming at first. So I think for us running the pilot this year, the main key thing that we've learned is about preparation. And have the opportunity to read through the content, attend the training, make sure you've had time to navigate your platform with whichever core induction provider that you're going to use. There's lots of documents and lots of resources to navigate, to give yourselves the time to absorb the information and then share it out there.
And if you're in a trust, with the real priority of the trust support around this is crucial to implementing with fidelity. Belinda.
Yeah, I'd also like to use the word preparation as well. Just choosing your mentors carefully considering those as a secondary setting, considering subject specificity, designated weekly time slots and time for them to meet for instructional coaching, and having that opportunity, mirroring Sarah's point, to read through the content. But also, just one other thing is to have that regular engagement with the mentors as well. Be that person they can turn to, regular engagement, whether that be a personal email, a group email, online meeting, or an informal chat face to face.
Thank you so